This conference will now be recorded.
Well, welcome everyone to the March edition of the Arlington Senior Democratic Lunch. This is Pie Day, so I hope everybody is eating a slice of pie.
Yes, it is.
And yes. And
3:14.
right, we're very pleased to have three guests with us today. Our first guest is Amanda Turner, who's a precinct captain and spent time last fall knocking on doors and poll greeting to elect local Democrats. She's also a member of the Green Valley Civic Association's Executive Committee and our delegate to the Arlington Civic Federation.
Bob?
Her professional life as a lawyer turned her to devote substantial time to volunteer for pro bono work.
Bob,
Robert,
your audio
is deteriorating.
Good to know. Yes. Okay, I will speak up.
Oh, that's better.
Turner devotes substantial time to volunteer pro bono work. She currently represents Planned Parenthood and litigates abortion rights in federal court. And she has mentored young lawyers in housing rights cases and in parole proceedings. Miranda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate that intro. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you're clear.
Great. I'm hoping it's not the wind that was messing up the audio or that it comes after me next, but it's pretty crazy out there. Thanks, Bob, for that intro. My name is Miranda Turner, and I am one of two candidates for school board in Arlington this year. I will say that Bob stole some of my thunder with my intro of myself, but I'll also add that I've been an APS parent since 2015. I've got a rising APS middle schooler and two elementary students. I've been involved in two PTAs. And as Bob mentioned, I am on the executive committee of my civic association and a delegate to CivFed. And I try to stay involved with the community, both for the schools and with the schools, but also at the county level, because I think there's a lot of room for collaboration there. And both aspects are really important. So I also think a lot of folks know that I ran for school board before in 2021. I'm sorry, I also have a frog in my throat. So I did run 2 years ago against Mary Cadera, who was a very formidable opponent and has been an excellent school board member ever since. And I just wanted to mention my prior run because it was like a boot camp. And I learned a lot, and I was before this group back then as well, and I'm pleased to be here again. I also built a lot of relationships during that first run, and I've stayed involved ever since. So I've been advocating a lot with the school system, with our electeds, and I think that really speaks to one of the reasons that I would make a good school board member if I can earn your vote. I think that I have already started to develop relationships. I have met with Dr. Duran somewhat regularly over the past 2 years. I developed a really good relationship with his former chief of staff, who actually sent an endorsement of me this past weekend for my launch party. And so that was actually quite an honor. And I saw Dr. Duran's current chief of staff, Stephen Linkus, just last night at the event over at Thomas Jefferson Middle School, which was in the nature of a call to action on some of the serious mental health and substance use problems that we're seeing in APS. So all of that to say, I am still involved. I've been involved as a parent and as an advocate. I also, as Bob mentioned, have been involved with the Dems. I am a precinct captain. I did knock on doors last fall to re-elect Don Beyer and Matt DeFrenti and to elect Bethany Sutton, also an excellent school board member. And recently, I helped to coordinate a presentation at the February 2nd Saturday breakfast, again on mental health and drug use, which featured Matt and also Janeth Valenzuela, a community activist. And I thought it was a really good panel. I don't actually know if it was recorded, but if it was, I commend it to all of you. So I'll start talking about myself. and I'd like to start talking about the issues. I've got obviously a platform, as any candidate does, and I want to just say three of my priorities. One is instruction. Maybe that sounds like low-hanging fruit for a school board candidate, but I think that we really want to keep a laser focus on instruction with respect to where our priorities are. And that means a lot of things, but it really means making sure we're meeting the needs of every student. We have students who did not do so well during virtual and during COVID, and they are behind. I think that we ought to focus a lot of resources on trying to catch them up. We have students who were behind before the pandemic, in part because of the way APS shifted its literacy curriculum for several years. We are now getting back to phonics, but we have secondary students who aren't reading on grade level. And that's a real problem for their futures. And I think that it's something that we ought to be driving to correct while they are still in the system. We've got a lot of students with disabilities who are not necessarily being well served, and we are not meeting our inclusion goals across the board of 80% of our students with disabilities being included 80% of the time. And we have students who need more of a challenge. So I'm in favor of bringing back intensified courses in some of the areas where we have not offered that in recent years, because again, I really think that in order to best serve every student and to make APS an equitable learning environment, we need to make sure that we are meeting the needs of every student wherever they are along the spectrum. So that would be my first priority. Second is teachers. Our teachers are what makes our school system, and recruiting and retaining them is the name of the game. We have very recently, in the last year, come through with increases to compensation, which is great. However, so is everybody else. And we are sort of in the middle, top half, but we're not at the top. And APS used to be at the top in terms of teacher pay. It also used to be at the top in terms of class sizes. And I think both of those things made it a great place to work and made it a really special school system. So I'd like to focus on getting back to those things. And I would also like to push for paid parental leave for our teachers, which we briefly offered several years ago, and then unfortunately, due to budget constraints, was taken away. I think that's incredibly important. It's the right thing to do. And again, it's a competitive benefit that will make APS an even more attractive place to work. Second priority, that was the second priority. And my third is budget. A budget is a major part of what the school board does. And I think in order to reflect your priorities, you've got to put them in the budget and pay for them. If there's no money in the budget, you can say what you want, but it's not a real priority. So simply put, I think our budget ought to drive at providing high quality instruction for students, interventions for those students who need them, and competitive pay and benefits for teachers. So those are my three priorities for APS. And I say that with an emphasis because, it's very local. And I think that that is where a lot of the focus for a school district ought to be. But these days, not everything is exclusively local. In fact, many things are not exclusively local. And with Governor Youngkin, I think that there are state level challenges. And I just want to address those as well so that everybody knows where I stand. The two that come to mind immediately, because I think they've been in the news recently, is Governor Youngkin's model transgender policies, which I do not agree with. APS has a policy. It put it together in 2019. I was privileged to be able to speak with former school board member Nancy Van Doren, who had a hand in that policy drafting and passage. And I agree with the APS policy. I think that our students should go to the bathroom, our transgender students should go to the bathroom as the gender that they identify with. And if anybody caught that CNN town hall, I mean, boy, did that APS student acquit himself and our system really well. So I just want to make clear on that our school board does take a stand on these state level issues from time to time. And our school board put out a statement along with Dr. Duran in September in response to Governor Youngkin's model policies, and I agree with it. Second thing that is coming up these days is Governor Youngkin's proposal to, I think, address learning loss. And it appears to be in the form of vouchers. And That is, to my mind, insufficient and the wrong approach. What he has proposed is $3,000, I think, that would go to families individually, and therefore put the onus on families to, one, know that their child is behind and needs this support. Two, go out and navigate the system and find an appropriate support for their child, manage all of that. And at the end of the day, I don't think it would be enough. I don't think $3,000 for students who really need a lot of catching up is going to be adequate. So for all of those reasons, I support Delegate Van Valkenburg's amendment on this, which would push the money through the school divisions. And I think that that is a far more effective and appropriate way to use public money. Put it into the public school divisions and let the schools leverage existing structures and provide the support and the interventions for the students who need it. Here in APS, we can absolutely use more funding if we can get it from the state. Last year in connection with the budget process, a question was asked to APS staff about how many secondary students we have who are not reading on grade level. The answer was 1,201. They know how many there are. And then the question was, okay, let's put a number on that. What would it take to get those kids where they need to be? And the answer was about $4 million. So we know who the students are who need that extra support. We know how much it would cost. And if we can get additional funding from the state, I'm very supportive of that, and I hope we can do it. And if not, here in Arlington, I know somebody speaking later today is a candidate for county board. I think that we need to look to the county as well to provide additional funding, which they have over the past several years, to APS so that we can lift up our students who need them and provide them with the support and get them reading on grade level. So with that, I will stop. That is all I wanted to share with you folks today, but I would love any questions about what's on your mind for APS and what you would like to see in a school board candidate.
Thank you, Miranda. We do have a tradition here of asking a lot of tough and interesting questions. I'll start with the first one, which is, Arlington schools have for a long time had a very formal program for partnerships with companies and community groups, and also put an emphasis on community use of schools. So the school's facilities, after hours and so on, could be used by the community. What are your views on those programs?
I am really glad that you mentioned that, actually, because I think coming out of the pandemic and, with our students' mental health challenges and academic challenges, it really requires an all hands on deck approach. So, when I say that, of course, I'm hoping that the community can come together and that we can leverage our civic minded, volunteers that we have. Everyone in the Earl Dems is a volunteer of their time. And people spend incredible amounts of time. So I think the Earl Dems is a great potential resource for connecting with students and building those bonds across generations. I also think our civic associations are another example, and I've raised it with mine. Community partnerships, I think, are a key part of how we can move forward together and also build bridges between generations and, serve our students along the way. And I think it's good for everybody. I mean, I've volunteered in my 20s in a public school in Boston when I lived there as a reading buddy. And it's just great to get to know different walks of life within your own community. And in terms of using the space, I think my neighborhood school is Drew, and it's right next to the community center. And opening up more programming there for all ages would be, I think, a really excellent thing for the county to do.
Thank you. Paula has the next question.
There, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Paula.
Okay, good. I will even try to use the camera here so someone was complaining we couldn't be seen. I was wondering, NAACP has a very active education group, and I wonder if you've been in contact with them about their concerns. I know they're also really concerned about the school board. I don't have kids and don't feel myself the most qualified person to ask questions or get involved, but I do like to hear from them and see their concerns addressed.
Yes, great question. Really important point. The answer is yes. So I've got a very good relationship with the new president of the NAACP. I have met with the former education committee chairs, and I hope to meet with the new chair who just started a couple, maybe 1 or 2 months ago as well. But generally speaking, I think the concerns are ones that should trouble us all, which is, there are you want to call them achievement gaps, opportunity gaps. There are disparate outcomes by demographic groups, and that is not where we want to be. It's been that way for a long time, and it is not something we've seen to make progress against. One of my priorities, when I mentioned instruction, would be leveraging data and actually setting benchmarks and measuring progress against them in all of these ways. So if there are achievement gaps that we need to address, we absolutely need to do it, and we need to do it by targeted, tailored intervention. Another huge priority of the NAACP, the last time I ran in particular, was SROs. I was in favor of removing the SROs from the schools then. I think that we had a community process. We did it for a reason, and I remain in favor of that decision today. That said, I do think we've got safety issues in our schools that need to be addressed, and I don't know if the NAACP is going to take up a similar issue or not, but I believe we're aligned on that. And then the last thing I want to say about that education committee is I understand that a couple of individuals at the NAACP were responsible for getting a very specific dyslexia-oriented intervention into Drew, my neighborhood school, which I think is just a wonderful thing. And it could use more volunteers. So if anybody's interested, let me know.
Could I interrupt with just a housekeeping item? There are two people that have joined us by telephone. If you could just tell us your names.
Can you hear me, Bob?
Yes, who are you?
Yeah, Libby Garvey. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, Libby. Okay, great.
Yeah.
I will
Hi, I
rename
couldn't
you.
get the app to work. Thank you. Yep.
Okay, and who is the other person who joined us?
Hi, Sis Linda. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, you might want to mute your phones with *6 to avoid background noise if necessary. But with that interruption, I will now call on Callie to ask the next question.
You're on mute.
There we go. I was, before my question, I was laughing at your suggestion that they somehow work community programs at Drew. My daughter went to Drew 36 years ago, and we talked about it then. And I think there's an institutional bias. They had the senior lunch and a quilting group there and a whole bunch of stuff, and we never could get anyone to think about having joint school, elderly, even when it was like all the rage and everybody's writing all the articles about it. So I wish you good luck. But I do think there has been, and this is my side comment, a kind of institutional bias about blending community function with the schools or community programs when they're in shared space. We fought over this bitterly, it's at least 36 years ago. And got nowhere, and they've rebuilt Drew and they've changed Drew, and it's just I think so. So my actual question is, I was very intrigued by your talk about data. I know that there's a parents group out there which has been raising the issue of dashboards and data dashboards and comparable data, and so I'd like you to elaborate a little more on what you see is needed and how you see the school board is using it in discussion of instructional approaches and outcomes.
Yep, absolutely. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So there are two dashboards that I'll speak to. I'll start with the one called the Academic Progress Dashboard. And I don't think it's overstating it to say I personally had a hand in advocating that be done and put up to the public. And I've played with it a number of times myself. I've looked at it. I've written emails based on the numbers that you can generate from it, and it's a nice, robust tool. You can do it by school, by demographics. You can get percentages. You can get ends. It's great. It reflects DIBELS, which is an elementary reading screener, a math inventory, and I think they're working on a better reading inventory for older students. What I think that is needed in that data is a sense of what we're aiming for, a benchmark, a goal, what we should expect to see in terms of progress, and what we think it would take in terms of resources to achieve that progress and over what time frame. I mean, I think that those are things that I would see as the school board's purview and potentially Dr. Duran's as well to set and then to hold, folks accountable towards making that progress as against those measures. So that's the academic dashboard. And it's limited, right? Because some of these things are screeners and some of them are at a basic level, and it doesn't give us what we want to know about the qualitative value of our children's education. But it's a start. The second one is an equity dashboard. And that one I think is not as well developed currently. And I would really like to see it be more robust as a starting point. But I also think that in order to get there, we need to have some community conversations and some real thought go into what we would like to see, what we think we can measure that would tell us something about equity. Because right now, it's a bit of a mismatch, and I think all of the things are important. For example, it's suspension data, super important, NAACP issue. But then there's also an effort to measure demographics of students who are taking AP classes. And those things are really quite different. And so I think that there are a lot of ways in which that dashboard could become a real driver of the conversation because, whatever we want to measure, we should measure it over time. And then we have to talk about what conclusions, if any, we can draw from that. But right now, I think we're still at the phase where we're not quite decided on what we want to measure and even what our thesis would be for what that data could show us.
Can we go back to the instructional one? I agree with you about the equity one. It is all over the map. Can we go back to the instructional one with the idea of setting goals and benchmarks? Would that also be part of a community conversation or a conversation between and among the board and the instructional? How would you start benchmarking the academic achievement part of that? What do you see in that?
So one of the conversations I've had in talking with folks who've actually done this job, I think it was Mary Hines who, when she was on the board, they set a benchmark of everyone reading on grade level by third grade. Basic, simple. So that is an example. And I think, for something like that, that's an APS question at the beginning. I think, right? Dr. Duran is going to have thoughts on that. The folks who work in SciFex are going to have thoughts on that. The school board, ought to be involved as well. But the folks who work for APS, they know education, they know instruction. In terms of a community conversation, though, there are always community conversations around things like whether we ought to offer intensified courses. And then once we start doing that, are they reflective? The student composition, are they reflective of our student body as a whole? And if that's not happening, that's something that I think we ought to benchmark as well, because we should be making sure that, that's equity, right? We make sure that we are giving our students the opportunity to meet their potential. And if it's uneven by whether or not you receive free lunch or whether or not you are Black or Hispanic, that's something that we need to look at. It's not it's not the student, it's the system. And so I think that that's another thing we ought to be wrapping in to our discussion of academic achievement.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we squeeze in one last question from Steve Ferber, if you could make it very crisp, because we really want to, keep on schedule. Steve, a quick question.
Okay, Bob. Yeah, I noticed that of late there's been an awful lot of coverage in the news about the hard drug problem, fentanyl and all. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
Yes, I have many thoughts on that as a parent. Starting from there, it's terrifying. It is much different than when I was growing up.
Right.
It seems to be everywhere, and it's very scary. Um, I'm going to try to be crisp. So I think one, mental health has to be a part of the conversation. There was an excellent program last night coordinated by the CCPTA and our high school PTA representatives. Just an incredible effort. And there was so much talk about how, the antidote to substance use is connection. And it's making sure that you've got a community around you of friends, of trusted adults, and so I think that that is something we all need to be cognizant of, and I think we are. Everybody is now talking about it, and that's a good thing. Second thing
It
is,
takes
it's
it takes a village, as they say.
exactly. It does. It really does. And then the second thing is, we have to take steps to make sure we are limiting access and ease of use. So if there are reports that students are using drugs in bathrooms or stairwells, which there have been those reports, I think that the schools need to take steps to address that. And again, I said what I said already about SROs. That is not what I am saying. But I am saying that if we have specific problems that's making it easier for drugs to come into our schools and to be used in our schools, we should take specific steps in response to that to try to get them out. And then beyond that, it's got to be a partnership with the county, which I understand DHS is badly understaffed right now. So we just have to talk about what we can do to make efficiencies happen and leverage the folks that we do have during this really challenging time of everyone trying to hire for mental health because everyone is suffering.
Yes, that program was highlighted on the local CBS News last night,
Okay.
and we do want to distinguish too between kind of the softer drugs and the really hard ones, which are the
Yes.
ones causing all the problems and deaths. So,
Okay,
I,
but let's could you Miranda, could you please summarize and conclude your remarks? Thank you.
Yes, I will. I probably don't have too much else to add, but I did want to say if anybody wants to connect offline, I'd be more than happy to do it. I have met a ton of people over the past 2 years, and even before that, it's been great to get um, the perspectives from everyone, and I really appreciate it. I'm asking for your vote in the caucus, which is early, May 7, May 10, and May 13. And again, prioritize instruction and our teachers, look at that through a budget lens, collaborate with the county, and that's all. I'll end now, only 2 minutes over.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it and appreciate all your insights. Our next
thank you.
guest is James Herring, who is a candidate for sheriff, born in Washington, D.C. in 1990. He relocated to Arlington with his family in 1993. He attended the
Speak up,
University of
Bob.
Wisconsin-Madison on an Army ROTC scholarship. He served in the National Guard since graduation. Herring joined the Metropolitan D.C. Police, where he was assigned to the 7th District over in Anacostia. After 5 years in 2019, he transferred to the Arlington Police. James, you have the floor.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Bob, and thank you for having me on this call. It's nice to meet everyone. And so just to add a little bit to my resume before I start talking kind of about what I want to do with the Arlington County Sheriff's Office is I served as a company executive officer when I was in the Guard and was responsible for 160 soldiers and over $20 million in equipment. I also served as a division liaison officer as well and helped to work on the plans that hopefully for wars we never fight, but would involve tens, if not hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And I was representing a 2-star general to a 3-star general. So it was a very high visibility assignment. And as Bob said, I left DC for Arlington, which had a much better work-life balance. It still has a much better work-life balance, which allows me to also coach rowing at WNL, something that I was always passionate about ever since leaving high school and leaving rowing at Wisconsin, was getting back into the sport and giving back to the communities in ways that I received when I was a young rower, and I wanted to pay it forward to the next generation. And it's really been a privilege to help mentor the next generation of Arlingtonians. So why am I running for sheriff? There have been many reasons. I think the biggest one is that a lot of Arlingtonians just simply don't know that there is a sheriff's office. And as an Arlington County police officer, and working for an agency that is probably down about a third in manpower, it's very frustrating that we have another law enforcement entity in the county that the community is unaware of. They're unaware of the 160 deputies they have, the almost $50 million they get annually from the county in the budget, or the fact that they can house, I think right now they're at about 200 people in custody, but the jail does have the capacity to go up into the high 600s. So that's a lot of people that the sheriff is responsible for, a lot of money that the sheriff is responsible for, with no oversight or accountability to the people. And I think that that's kind of leads into the next point, which is that we've read, thanks to the diligent reporting of Arlington Now, about many of the deaths in the jail. And when I started looking into this to do the research for the campaign and try to find out more, to just really have a good conversation about the subject, it seems as though there have been 8 deaths in 10 years. There was one in 2013, but other than just a little byline in the news that didn't seem to register at all. And I'm one of the deaths in 2020, Virginia Department of Corrections investigated and found that the particular individual. And just this past February, the sheriff's office relating to that investigation settled a wrongful death suit to the tune of $1.3 million. So this is something that I'm very passionate about as a former soldier, as a former DC officer, and currently as an Arlington officer, and just the human being in general, is that we are aiming at best for the minimum standards in the sheriff's office, and we're still coming up short in providing care for the people who are in custody, many of whom have not even had their day in court yet. They're not convicted criminals. They're just simply being housed pending their court date. So I really want to focus on getting a trained medical doctor that is on the board of medicine at an institution that we would respect, whether it's Virginia Hospital Center, George Washington, or Washington Hospital Center, somewhere that you would feel comfortable taking your family to for an annual checkup. I want to have a medical doctor whose only job is to build care plans for all the people in custody, building a staff for treating with those individuals, and then even getting the deputies trained up on emergency medicine as well, even to the level of paramedics like the fire department. Because another issue in the jail is that if you're walking down the street and you have a heart attack, somebody calls 911 and you're thrown in the back of an ambulance and taken to the ER, and you're there in minutes. It's not so simple in the jail. In the jail, they have to lock the whole jail down. They have to figure out, do we bring the patient down to the medical staff? Do we bring the medical staff up to the patient? And this is all precious time. When you're talking about minutes, can mean the difference between a full recovery and death. So I really want to have trained professionals that we all think are, highly professional in the jail to take care of the people who are in custody, because they don't have any other option. They're not afforded any other option. So we need to do the best that we can by them. I also want to really focus on bringing mental health and having it on par with providing medicine to people, because many of the people who are brought in to the jail have some form of mental illness. Some are worse off than others, but we need to address everyone who comes into the jail. In some instances, it could just be the case that someone made poor decisions that brought them before law enforcement and brought them into the jail. But having a psychiatrist, someone who specializes in mental health, who can talk them through, figure out their rationale, and provide them a plan that they can work with so they don't potentially reoffend. Because if it is just a knowledge issue, or if it ranges all the way to an extreme mental health issue, having them before a professional and working with them who builds a case with them and builds a rapport with them that they trust, I think is absolutely crucial as well. And I think those two things will really do a lot to drive down the recidivism rate, not just in Arlington, but in the region as a whole, as many of the people in custody aren't even from Arlington. They're people who come through our county. So I'm hoping that it will help the whole region, not just Arlington. These resources, I think, will also help to an extent with the staffing problem that is currently afflicting all law enforcement nationwide. Like I said, the police department's down about a third of its personnel right now. The sheriff's office is down staffing wise to the point that they have to have deputies take mandatory overtime days on their days off. They're supposed to take a minimum of 2 a month right now, and I think some are even being forced to take 3 and 4. Being forced to work on your days off, I can say from experience, is pretty miserable. So we absolutely need to address the staffing issue, because working on your days off kills your morale, it kills your work-life balance, it makes you look for other municipalities that may not be as short-staffed. They may also even pay better and provide you more opportunities. Loudoun's a much larger sheriff's office, and then they may not even be looking for law enforcement in general. We're losing a lot of people to a company called Amazon as well. So some people are just getting the training and then leaving altogether. So addressing the staffing issue first by focusing on retention and making sure the people who are currently working there understand that they are valued, they're not replaceable, and we need to hold on to them, because if they're leaving faster than we can hire people, it won't really matter how many people we hire and what our recruiting efforts look like. I do want to try to recruit far and wide. There's many great people in this area that have military backgrounds, and the military bases in the area bring a lot of people who would not otherwise come to the DC area. And so working with the bases and working with people who are about to hit the end of their service obligation but want to stay in the area and are looking for lines of work, I think there's a benefit in trying to recruit amongst those individuals. And I think trying to recruit from other law enforcement agencies, I am a prime example as a refugee from DC police that it is possible to poach from other agencies. We just have to be smart about it, and we have to upsell. We may not be able to match DC penny for penny, but we can definitely beat them in schedule. And I really love the community that we have in Arlington. I think we have a much better school system than DC public schools. I think we have a lot of the benefits that DC has without a lot of the drawbacks. So I think if we just sell that a little bit better to our regional competitors, we can definitely see an influx of personnel in that regard. Something else that's very near and dear to me is sustainability. You don't hear that often with law enforcement, but I really want to try to find ways to be more efficient with what we do. We burn through a lot of paper in law enforcement land, and trying to get the office to go paperless, I think, will help with better records keeping. I think it will make the system more accessible and more transparent, and it will save a lot of money and save a lot of impact on the environment. Trying to get solar panels on the jail, on the courthouse, they may not be the most aesthetically pleasing things, but at the same time, I think they're beautiful because they're saving us money. They can provide some energy redundancy in the event that we do lose power, so the jail still is able to work fully with heating and air conditioning, which is absolutely crucial in our climate. I want to try to get all vehicles to be hybrid and or electric vehicles. When the gas prices were creeping up, I can't tell you how many emails we got from command staff saying to use fuel at the contracted lot rather than using the gas stations throughout the county, but the contracted lot was always out of gas. And so if we have electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, we as county residents aren't footing the bill whenever factors far beyond our county's ability drive up the gas prices. So we have the electricity. Electricity is far cheaper than gas. We should definitely be trying to have the vehicle fleet electrified, or at least hybridized. I also want to try to contract with regional farms and get away from having big contracts that supply the food for the jail. Contracting with regional farms will allow us to reduce packaging, reduce waste. The people in custody will probably be eating better. There's many studies that show if you eat better, you make better decisions. And it just kind of ties into the holistic view that I'm trying to have for the jail. I know all of what I'm saying, people are probably thinking this is going to cost a decent amount of money. I don't think it will, because at least with the doctor, we have a medical doctor on staff with the fire department, so we already have a template for success there. A lot of what I'm saying will cost some money in the initial, but it will save us money in the long term. And something I discovered this past weekend at the forum I was at Busboys and Poets is that the sheriff's office does not even have a grant writer on staff. So even simple fixes like having a professional grant writer who can get all the money that's on the table from CARES Act, from DCJS grants that are down in Richmond that are being adequately funded from the budget surplus. There's a lot of money being thrown around by larger government entities in Arlington, so we don't have to work just with the county board. We can go get money from other areas. We just need to have professionals who are looking at that and going out to get it. And with that I think would conclude my opening remarks. So I will take any questions.
Sure. Thank you, James, and we do appreciate you being here with us. The first question is, for many decades, we've had a police benevolent association, which sort of serves as a union for the police department. And I'm really not that familiar with how the sheriff's deputies are organized, but we do have collective bargaining now in Arlington. This has just happened in the past year. The law went into effect. How do you see collective bargaining work, particularly since I assume that the sheriff has to have comparable conditions of work to that of the police department, since you compete with each other for staff? How's all that going to work out for you?
So there's a bit to unpack there. So I'll try to answer each question. So the first thing is the police department is a separate entity from the sheriff's office, and the sheriff's office is created by the Constitution of Virginia. And as a constitutional officer, they are subject to far fewer restrictions than the police department is. And so while I'm a proud union member of our police union, and I was a proud union member when I was in the DC police department, I am not entirely certain that the sheriff's office or any sheriff's office in Virginia could unionize without a change to the Constitution of Virginia. I don't intend to run anything vindictively, though, having been someone who is, I know most of the people who work in the sheriff's office, and I like to listen to people. So while there would be no de facto, or I should say de jure union, the people who would work under me, should I be elected, would have an open door that they can always talk to me in and always bring their ideas in, and I'm not going to sharpshoot them and point out, because I want people to feel comfortable. That's how you identify problems. And then the second issue is the way that I understand some of the promotions have worked in the past with the sheriff's office. It's not the same as the police department, but you're effectively awarded points to get promotion. Those points can be off of getting assigned to specialized units, but a lot of the specialized units they tend to be assigned based off of the favor of the sheriff. And I'm not a fan of the good old boy system, as it's sometimes called. I would much rather have a system in place that rewards people not for flattering me, but for their competency. I want people who are proactive deputies, who are looking for problems in the jail, who are looking to find drugs being smuggled in, weapons being smuggled in, who are looking to find ways to innovate security and protecting the people in the courthouse. And I just don't think you really get that if you promote off of something that's completely unrelated to law enforcement and to bettering the sheriff's office. So that's kind of how I would address that in the near term, barring a constitutional amendment to Virginia.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And again,
Oh,
this
no
is not
problem.
my area of expertise. Does someone else have a question? Steve Ferber, please ask your question.
Yeah, hi. I was curious about a couple points in your background. Um, you say you're from Wisconsin originally?
I went to school in Wisconsin. I wanted to get snow in the winter, and they had a great rowing program in Army RTC. With that list, my colleges that I was looking at was pretty short.
And where in Wisconsin was that?
University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I was up at Minneapolis for 5 years in the late '70s in chemistry grad school. Knew a guy from New Richmond, which is right across the border there. But
Okay.
yeah, it's a interesting part of the country. I was wondering when you were in, was it Afghanistan?
No, I served in Qatar. It was not a
Oh,
combat deployment, but still gave me a lot of valuable experience.
yeah. The way you described it did sound more like planning than being out on the ground or whatever you say. So, okay. So you're at Qatar. Is that where the headquarters of what the Asia theater is?
Uh, the First Army has its headquarters there, but CENTCOM, I believe, was posted in Afghanistan, at least while we were stationed in Afghanistan. They may have relocated since, but that was far above my pay grade. You're talking about 4 stars and presidential decisions.
Okay. Well, I was just kind of curious about what your actual experience was there. Maybe it was tougher to be a cop in D.C. I don't know. Spent a I went to my second grad school at Howard University for like 10 years. So and spent a few months down near Anacostia at a IDEA charter school, trying to teach math to kids that were 10 years behind. And I mean, it's a challenging, situation. You get out of Georgetown, and my family's been residents there since right after the Civil War. So long history there, but it just it must have been challenging as a DC policeman, I imagine.
I was assigned to work down in the Anacostia and Bowling Air Force Base area.
Uh huh.
And Arlington, it's a bad year if we have 1 or 2 homicides. And
Right.
down where I was, some nights we were getting 3 or 4 of those a night. So it was a very different experience. But between the military and between that, there's a phrase I use with some of my coworkers where you can tell me anything. I'm only going to get offended if you shoot at me. So I have pretty thick skin. I love people bringing different ideas to me and working together with folks. And I think having that exposure to something that's very radically different than Arlington has made me a better cop and just a better person because I have looked a lot. I have seen where a lot of the problems in law enforcement today are. And I've seen that perspective from 2 agencies, and then as well as with the military experience. And I'm thankful for the experience. And I've worked with a lot of great people over there. And there's a lot of great people in the community over there that are just sadly being held hostage by a handful of folks that choose violence rather than words to settle their issues.
How much of a problem do you think lack of gun control plays into this whole violence, you know, issue?
Um, that's a tough
Being a man
question
out on the
because
street. Yeah.
realistically, the only way you could control firearms would be some sort of national policy because people will
Yes.
always go to a state that has much laxer laws to get guns. And if that state changes, they'll just go another state over. And barring the Supreme Court and Congress having much different viewpoints than they currently do, I just don't really see anything substantially changing unless neighborhoods and communities band together and really kind of work hand in hand with the schools and with law enforcement, because a lot of the people who choose crime, it's a it's a financial decision. If you went and you boosted a Prius or you stole a catalytic converter, that catalytic converter is going to get you about $500 in cash. If you boost a car, you're going to get about 20, 30,000 in cash. That's not going to be taxed. You won't have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid taken out of it. Now you go back to school, your friends see you, you've got a stack of cash that's about half of my salary right in your hand. And they look at that, and then they look at grinding in the classroom and what that potentially gets them. You're young, you're 13, you're 15, seeing that amount of money, seeing that you haven't been caught yet. Maybe I should look into that line of work as well, especially because my family doesn't know where the next meal's coming from. Yeah, so it's not as cut and dry as just people choosing to be evil. It's economic decisions oftentimes that lead them down that path, and that's why we need to look a lot more holistically as law enforcement and as a society, rather than just trying to arrest our way out of a problem.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Callie's had her hand up. Callie, you want to ask your question?
Okay, two things possibly. I was very interested and I wanted to know in terms of managing the jail. Your emphasis that a lot of people there are pretrial detention and also have mental health issues. Having worked in the field of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, I'm incredibly familiar with the problems of people who have brain-based disorders getting themselves involved in crime at a very early age. How would that change the day-to-day administration of the jail and how you would run the detention facility? What kinds of things are you thinking? I know you're talking about bringing a doctor, mental health, but day-to-day, if you start with the assumption that a lot of people have not been found guilty, may not be found guilty, or have these mental health or brain-based disorders that have made them more vulnerable to exploitation. How does that work day to day in how you manage the jail? And also, are you a SAMS graduate? Are you a military planner?
A military planner? No, sorry. I was just
Okay.
an infantry officer that got traded up.
Okay. See, now if you'd said SAMS, I'd be like even more impressed, but okay, go ahead.
No, so that's a great question. So how that'll look in the day-to-day, I think, is you're going to see a lot more activity of the jail of people coming in and out. Because I've also realized in my time in government that people oftentimes will just hand a pamphlet of information, say, hey, whenever you can, call this person. The problem is
Right.
now the person who's supposed to provide the resources is getting called from 5, 10, 20 different people that they don't know any of their background on. So their phone line's always jammed up, and oftentimes it's given to somebody who doesn't even have a phone. I want to get providers directly face to face working with people in the jail, and I want to be a lot less I want to kind of put the providers in front of those individuals rather than just let the person tell us what they need, because to some extent that person may not know what they need, or if they're just allowed to keep choosing, it's like, well, I don't really want to talk to somebody about my problem. It's, well, you need to talk to somebody. We need to put a provider in front of you. Right now, the jail doesn't really work with pathways to housing. So there's oftentimes people who would love housing and would qualify it with it under pathways program, but they're just released. They're not told that you're within spitting distance of the shelter for Arlington. You just need to walk around the corner. And so that's what I think would look radically different, is you'd see a lot more people working with these individuals, because I want to view jail more as a chance for somebody to reset their life and as a opportunity. It's the person is held in one place, and some of these people can be really hard to get services because they can be so transient. You just can't find them most of the times on the day-to-day. So while they're in one place and we have them, we're feeding them good food, they have good medical attention. Let's have someone sit down and kind of lay out what the path looks like for them once they get out of jail.
So you're thinking of focusing on post-release planning to a certain extent, and then also just improving the day-to-day interactions. I think the point of putting providers in front is important, because particularly some of the people with the mental health, even if you give them a number, they don't have the capacity
Exactly.
emotionally or mental health wise to understand, to utilize that, or even to pick up the phone if they have certain kinds of anxiety or whatever disorders. They're just not going to do it. So
Exactly.
it's a really interesting approach. Thank you.
Well, in the military, they say failure to plan is planning to fail. And
Correct.
I think we're often very cavalier with, it's like, well, they're not in our custody anymore, so they're not our problem. And I think viewing it as they're not your problem right now. They will do, some of these folks will do something, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and they will end up here again. And they might be in a lot worse shape, and they might have done something a lot worse. And now you've got someone who's potentially victimized, as well as they may be in a much worse medical condition, and it's a lot harder. And now you've got two people whose lives are potentially ruined because we didn't want to take the extra effort.
Yeah. There were some pretty, back in the day when there was a little more money for this kind of stuff, which is going back about long before I retired, there were some pretty good studies about the relationship between certain kinds of brain-based disorders and recidivism and exploitation, which led to criminal behavior. So if you're thinking of how you break that cycle, that could be a very important thing, even though in Arlington it would be very small scale. It would be much more important someplace like Rikers. But but yeah, that would be a really interesting to have a jail sort of organized around the principle of breaking that cycle.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it might be a lot easier to implement here versus at Rikers, where there's such culture, such history there. Our jail is big enough that it could make an impact, but small enough that you're not trying to steer the Titanic. We're very nimble, and we are a very prosperous county. So we definitely can use the resources we have to provide the better treatment. We just have to make the choice to do so.
Okay, if I could bring that to conclusion, James, do you want to just summarize and close your presentation, please?
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to speak. And I just want to say, I hope I can count on everyone's vote on June 20th. I know that the other candidates have spoken to you, and I know that they have highlighted their decades of experience over me in law enforcement. What I'd highlight is the time that I've been working. I have effectively had 2 careers, and I've also learned a lot from my time in the military as a leader. And additionally, I'd point out that we keep picking senior law enforcement leaders with multiple decades of experience and expecting them to be the change that finally fixes everything. And time again, every community has found that that's not the case. I don't think it's fair to the professional that they put in that position. And I don't think it's fair to the community to want that, but then have someone who comes up short. As someone who, while I only have a decade in this, it's all post Ferguson, post George Floyd, post Memphis training, all looking at the ground level, what we need as a society to change law enforcement. So it's something we can all be proud of, something that can really set the foundation for the future conversations. So I hope that you guys will pick me. I hope you'll spread the word for June 20th. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, James. Our third and final guest today is Susan Cunningham, who is a founding member of both the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee, which was a group that looked at school needs in terms of county needs, and also the Lee Highway Alliance. Susan Cunningham ran for county board in 2020 as an independent. Susan, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you all for welcoming me here today. It's a privilege to be with you. And I think many of you may have had a chance to talk with me in previous campaigns or in any of the roles I've played more recently at AHC, stabilizing that affordable housing provider after some of the difficulties at the Serrano, and currently working with Arlington Thrive, which is another one of our really crucial institutions that is supporting our community members going through emergencies and needing financial assistance. I am running for county board because I'd really like to bring more common sense to our board. I think you all know there are 2 seats that will be open this year out of the 5. And as a parent, and really the only parent of school age kids who will be on the county board if I win this election. I think it's really, really important, like Miranda and James were both highlighting how important the connections are between not just community members themselves, but between all of the levers that we have as a community. Each dollar that we spend across the county, whether it's in the schools or in the jail or in DHS, really needs to work together to build the community that we want to live in. So, if you think about the work that I'd like to really bring to the county board, it's not super sexy. It's getting the basics of government right. I don't know if anyone's had to pull a permit or try to get an inspection lately, but there are some improvements there that we need to do. You've heard from others about the urgency of mental health supports, and that it goes to FTEs and hiring and housing and retention and all of those pieces. And those really are the basics. If we can't care for our people from early to late in their lives and to do it well, then we're just not delivering good government. The second area is really around housing. So I know you guys have probably heard a little bit about Missing Middle, and Libya's on the line, so you can direct it all to her. But no, the Missing Middle process has been really, really divisive and challenging. And part of that is that the housing issues really are challenging. We have a lot of work to do to get more diverse housing, to get more availability of housing at all levels, from the very earliest first rental room that you may need, all the way through home ownership and the many steps in between. And I've had some pretty significant challenges with how Missing Middle has unfolded. I think it is more complicated than we have made it out to be. I think we're all going to be a little disappointed in how little gets done and what gets done as a result of Missing Middle. But I think the focus on housing is really important, and both as a young person landing here in one of those illegal one bedrooms with no windows, on through buying our first house and working on the affordable housing efforts, and then more recently working with immigrants refugees arriving and needing bigger housing. I feel like I have a pretty good sense of the complexity of the levers, the financing, and the partners that are needed to move us forward as a community on housing, and also to reset the dialogue a little bit so that we can do so together. And then I would say the last piece is really around that dialogue and the collaboration and experience that I can bring to bring us together on solving what are fairly complex problems, whether it's public facilities, transportation, environment, or housing. The experience I have, and I've put a couple of links there that you're welcome to dig through, on the private sector, on the public sector, and here in Arlington for over 25 years. I think that the experience I can bring, the skill sets that I can bring, will be a really good balance, add balance to our board, and again, bring common sense leadership to the board. So I'd be happy to answer questions, and just really thrilled to be here for this conversation about schools and the sheriff's office as well. It's really fun to be with the whole crew here.
Susan, thank you so much for your remarks, and again, thank you for coming here today. I was very interested in Missing Middle, and I listened very carefully to what you said, but could you possibly elaborate just a little bit more? What would you do to increase and diversify the housing stock in Arlington? Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with Missing Middle is it's a single step and a single solution, and so to get housing right in a urban community, we need to be able to do more than by right development. So by right is each of us who owns a parcel of land, when we sell it or if we redevelop it, the rules that we can maneuver within on that 5,000 square foot lot is the by right piece. To get really the density and intensity of housing that people want in some of the transit corridors, it is not usually going to be by right. So if you think about, the missing middle housing types that we have today throughout the county, the townhouse communities, the 4x4 communities, the kind of post-war housing in Arlington, those were not by right small parcels, individual lot developments. They are more planned communities, and that's not what we're going to get out of missing middle. When you look at our affordable housing stock, those would not just pop up with the single step change to the zoning that we are proposing. So what we need to do is actually pull all those levers. It is everything from affordable housing preservation, affordable housing investments, and more planned communities. For instance, we've got some parcels like East Falls Church. There's a number of different plans, master plans that have been made over the years that we haven't launched. And that will get us way more housing and way more kind of service enriched, as well as, coffee shop enriched and grocery store enriched, and sort of a community that works well.
Okay, thank you. Who has the next question? Could you, Paula, you're next.
Thank you. Following up on that, my understanding from the meetings I've attended and discussions and things is that to aim at affordable housing would require tax money up front, as opposed to this approach, which I agree with what you said initially. I don't think it's going to achieve, I'm not convinced it's going to achieve everything we'd like, but it does eliminate exclusionary zoning that's, historically been aimed at disenfranchised communities. How are you going to get the money to invest in affordable housing? Which other, programs are you taking it from? Or, again, where would you get those funds?
Yeah, and affordability can come in a couple of different characteristic approaches, right? So we have what we think of as committed affordable units are largely funded through AHIF, which is the Affordable Housing Investment Fund. When developers get extra density along the metro corridor, for instance, they put money into that fund, and APA and HC and Wesley Housing and others, Barcroft, access those funds to do some of the larger projects. But affordability can also be more naturally occurring. It can be in smaller pockets as well. So some of you know the community I live in is right next to Ham Middle School. We're in one of the 1950s ramblers up there that hasn't been redeveloped, and when one of our neighbors needed to move out of a similar one next door, we were able to preserve that, what was not super affordable and not committed affordable at that time, but we were able to preserve that home and to redeploy it to be used for refugee housing in a much more affordable way, actually, than it would take to build committed affordable units. And so there's programs like that we can incentivize. There's some things we need to get out of the way to make that more workable, to use some of the some of the housing stock we have already, or some of what gets built to meet the needs of folks at different stages of their family life and of their economic achievement. And that we can do in our neighborhoods and with the support of our community members. So that's one way to get to affordability. The other ways are, some of the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit efforts that we have started to move into and pilot. The way those rules were sent initially were constrained to make sure that we could get some experience before we moved them to do more, and we can do more with those ADUs. I think if some of you may have explored doing a basement apartment or a backyard apartment. And we can do more with that, where more people, again, can live in the same space. And then the final lever, an additional lever, is really how we define family. So our family definition has been really focused on, sort of a two-person household with a couple of kids, rather than more complicated and blended families or chosen families that we have today. And again, if you have a 5,000 square foot house, it could certainly accommodate more people in it, and how we define related and family can have some more flexibility there as well.
All
Thank
right.
you.
The next question I have is, uh, what do you think of the so-called Arlington way of participatory governance, and how do you balance getting things done versus transparency versus efficiency and so on, and consensus? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to build on, in that we've had this spirit of deep engagement across the county historically. The reality, though, is that everyone, many people are busy, and who can put time into some of those processes is very unbalanced, right? And so especially our most economically vulnerable households don't have the time and resources in many cases to participate in that way. And so I do think that we have to work harder to make sure we're bringing all those voices into the room. And we also, I feel, and from a number of different processes I've been involved, from leading the community planning team for the Stratford and Ham Middle School, to being one of the founding members on JFAC that was trying to move forward on the community facilities study, and then now on CivFed as a delegate in our Donaldson Run Civic Association. Our transparency and engagement and dialogue with each other has gotten a little bit astray. And COVID did not improve that, and certainly the bandwidth of the county to be able to respond and be incredibly transparent got a bit narrowed. But good government is transparent government, and it takes time to do that well, but we have to. Like, you can't have good government in a democracy without transparency, without the data visibility that Miranda was sharing, without the looking at how to improve and learn from things that went well and didn't go well, as James was sharing. We have to be transparent as a community, and we have to bring all the voices into the room, even if they can't be there personally for every minute of it.
Other questions, raise your hand, please. Steve.
Yeah, hi, Susan. I I don't want to be offensive. I'm just sort of curious. You ran last time not as a Democrat. Could you explain? I mean, did you miss out on a primary, or I'm not. I just was wondering what.
Yeah, happy to. I was wondering how we could get all the way, 20 minutes into this without this conversation, but yeah, happy to hit that one. So
Sure.
I ran in the special election in 2020. So you remember that Eric Gutschall died
Yeah,
in office.
sure.
It was the very first months of the pandemic. We had the distinct privilege as the first jurisdiction to have a special election during the pandemic in the Commonwealth. And it was a hard call. It was tough I think the party and others pushed the dates out as far as we could, but there's a state requirement of how quickly you have to fill a seat. And so the Democratic Party at that time decided to not do an open primary and not
Right.
do an open caucus for health reasons. And so
Okay.
the result of that was roughly 150 people were going to make the decision. And it was also 2020. We'd had a rough kind of 4 years on the democracy front with the little d. And I felt really
sure.
strongly that we needed to have an actual dialogue about what we wanted in the community. So I did explore running in the, in the if it had been a primary, I would have run as a Democrat, but when the decision was made to make the kind of invite only caucus, I didn't feel comfortable doing that. And yet I still felt called to serve. So that's why I ran as a progressive independent.
Okay. So you're not like an enemy of the Democratic Party's
I
principles.
mean, I think there are a handful of people who may never forgive me for that, but no, that was the concept. I grew up in a really, really Republican part of the country in central Pennsylvania, not too far from here, but very different.
Right.
And when I did register to vote as a Democrat when I turned 18, and in the small little library there, when I went to vote, they couldn't find my name on the list. They kept looking because everybody knows you in a small town. Like, you must have screwed up. You didn't register properly. And then they pull out the like half a page list of
Democrats.
blacklisters, and they're like, oh, big eyes. So yeah, and I haven't been super active in the local Democratic Party, but I've done a lot of door knocking and donations and calls and postcards and all that stuff for Georgia, and Pennsylvania is where I grew up. So that is one that I spent a lot of time on.
So state, what is it? That town state university? That's actually in a Republican area.
Yeah, so I grew up on the campus of Susquehanna University. So it's a little town called Selinsgrove. You go north on 270, turn left at the second Walmart, not the first. And that's where I grew up. So.
But I didn't realize that was the Republican area. Yeah.
You look it up. It's pretty impressive. I forget how you measure that, but plus 50
Okay,
points.
I wanted to give Linda or Libby a chance to ask a question since they don't have a way of raising their hands. Does either Linda or Libby have a question? No? Okay. Linda, do you have a question?
Let me see. No, I've been taking notes and listening to everybody's perspective, and I'm very, very intrigued, very impressed. No questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Well, at this point, why don't you just take a couple of minutes to summarize? Be sure to say for the recording what your website name is, and again, sort of make your concluding remarks for us. We're so glad you're here.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Bob. Again, my website is susanforarlington.com. I would love to talk more with any individuals that have questions, and would really appreciate your support on the campaign, but also on June 20th when we will have ranked choice voting for the first time. So I don't even have to be your number one. I'll take your number two vote or even your number three. But really would just appreciate your continued interest in questions. And you can sign up there at susanforarlington.com to get updates along the way. And I would just reiterate, I've been an Arlington community member since 1997, an APS parent since 2012, and very engaged in our local issues and local processes, from affordable housing to safety net to schools, and bring really a passion for bringing our community together to tackle challenging problems and to build connections. And I think that I can bring the experience and the balance to have our county board really meet our community needs and bring our community together. So I would love to have your vote on June 20th, and happy to answer additional questions. You can always reach me by email at info@susanforarlington.com, and it's spelled out FOR. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and thank you. I do think you make a very valuable point at the end there. We are, for the first time in history having a state-sponsored primary that is using ranked choice voting under a new law that we helped lobby to get passed. We have used ranked choice voting in the school board caucuses for a number of years. And although there are 6 candidates running for county board, you shouldn't be asking yourself, which one do I want to vote for? You should be asking yourself, what is my order of preference among those 6? Because you will be voting by listing candidates in order of preference. So that's sort of a different experience for some people.
And
We'll
Bob,
get out.
You
Yes.
Bob,
don't have to.
who do we have to thank that for, Bob?
Right. Paula, you were saying, Paula?
Yeah, just a clarification. You do not have to list every candidate. And
No, you don't.
depending on your strategy, there may be reasons you wouldn't want to list some of them.
That is absolutely correct. I didn't mean to say that, but I just didn't want you to think you should be just thinking of 1 or 2. You can. The nice thing about ranked choice voting is your vote will not go away from your first choice until your first choice is either elected or defeated. So, for example, if hypothetically Susan is your first choice, voting for Susan as your first choice, you know you're not hurting her chances by also voting for other choices. But you should not vote for anybody you do not want to see elected. That's the idea. And Katie points out that because of software difficulties right now, you can only vote 3 deep, 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, as this evolves and we get better software, you can vote for, you'll be able to vote for more, but the software package they have now only supports 3 choices. I should tell you by way of disclosure, in 1970, I wrote a Fortran program to do ranked choice voting, and I've been peddling the idea ever since. So I'll give you my program for free if you get better opportunities in the voting machines to vote beyond 3 choices. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody today. I think both James and Miranda deserve extra bonus points for staying through the entire session, and we thank them for being in the audience. And we'll see you on the second Tuesday of April. We are now adjourned.